I have seen the torch of freedom pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dream some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all. So with deep appreciation for the blessings we
I've just been alerted to the fact that our audio was not working properly, and I hope it is now. Hello again, and welcome to Character Matters. I'm Dr. George Simon, welcoming you to another edition. I am sorry for the technical difficulties. I think we should be good now. And tonight's program, we're going to be talking about what I've been writing about on my blog at manipulative-people.com and drgeorgesimon.com. Now you can simply travel to drgeorgesimon.com. That's drgeorgesimon.com, and you'll get right over to my blog. Same thing if you surf on over to manipulative-people.com. So I encourage you to do so. Timely articles there. But I've been talking about the 10 Commandments of Character that I first mentioned in my book, Character Disturbance, and that I'll be talking about in depth in my upcoming book with Dr. Kathy Armistead, The 10 Commandments of Character, How to Lead a Significant Life. So please mosey on over to the blog, pay a visit there, lots of timely articles, including this latest series, just now concluding in these last few articles on the 10 Commandments of Character. The last one we've been talking about is being of humble and sincere heart and purpose. Perhaps a pivotal command in the 10 Commandments of Character, being authentic, being real, being genuine, being of humble heart first, understanding that meekness of spirit is really perhaps one of the greatest character traits. But also being of honest, genuine, sincere heart and purpose. When you're of humble heart and purpose, you behave in an authentic, genuine way. No pretense, no falsehood, no deception, no manipulation, no conning. And by the way, as the article mentions this time, no conning in the way of conning others, and especially no conning in the way of conning yourself. We human beings are just great self-deceptors, and we live in an age where everyone plays so fast and loose with the truth. We're used to being deceived all the time about everything. We're used to misrepresentations all the time. But perhaps there's nothing as detrimental to our personal character growth and to our relationships as all the deceptions that we engage in on our own, all the self-deceptions. You know, we all inhabit this same place. We have a relationship to one another, whether we like it or not, because we're all in this. We have a relationship to our world, and we have a relationship to the ultimate force in the universe that is responsible for us all being here. However you want to regard it, we all are manifestations of that energy at work. And interestingly enough, many times we just refuse to recognize that relationship. We always have that relationship. It's the character of that relationship that helps define our character. How do we relate? How do we conduct our interpersonal affairs? How do we regard our fellow human beings? And we also have a relationship with ourselves. How true to ourselves are we? How true are we to others? How true are we to the ultimate relationship? That's what this 10 commandment that I've been writing about is all about. And as I was mentioning earlier, I've had the good fortune to have traveled once again last week to several different venues. I was in beautiful San Francisco and Berkeley, California, and also just outside of Sacramento in Folsom, which has really turned into quite the community. I remember Folsom from years ago not being quite the up and coming and trendy community that it seems to be right now, in many parts at least. So it was an interesting experience, and I met a lot of folks who had a lot to share with me about some of the travails they've had in some of their relationships. And by far the more common thing that I heard was how much destruction, how much devastation, how much angst, how much anxiety, and especially how much hurt and depression was brought into their relationships because there was a lack of genuineness, especially if they were in a relationship with, for lack of a better terms, we'll call a good con artist, someone who knew how to look good on the outside, but who was still so narcissistic, so self-centered, so relatively incapable of genuine depth in a relationship that once the facade came down, once they had what they wanted with respect to having someone in a relationship, and from their standpoint, often possessing that person in a relationship. Once they had the object of their desire, once they had succeeded in seducing and possessing the object of that desire, then the real them came forward, and the real them was not pretty. You know, my wife and I have been having very interesting debate lately. Very interesting, not debate so much, but discussion about the importance of authenticity and the importance of people being who they are. And, you know, classically, we have always been taught that everyone is to some degree neurotic, and that is that their genuine self, their authentic self, is really good, wholesome, and pure. But that the way they've constructed defenses to deal with potential hurts in the world has not been good. They've built defenses that were not healthy, and therefore they relate in a manner that is not authentic, and what you see on the surface is not really what's underneath. Underneath, the real person is not just good, but lovable. And that's a wonderful viewpoint to have. But unfortunately, there are those among us who are somewhat disturbed in character, and that disturbance is not compensatory. It's not just a matter of defenses, and really underneath it all, the person is decent, wholesome, has a conscience, cares. There are some individuals, unfortunately, among us who don't care and whose facade might even be one of charm, might even be one where they have you thinking that they're quite congenial and likable, but underneath it all, they're really incapable of depth in the relationship. They may say all the right things to seduce you. They might do all the right things to convince you that they're a person that you can really love and trust. And then you find out later that in all of that seduction, in all of that manipulation, they were just trying to win you, maybe even like a prize, maybe even like possess you. And once they've done it, and they feel fairly safe and the jig is up, so to speak, and they don't really need to put on an act anymore, the real them starts to come to the fore. And it's not a pretty picture. And it's unfortunate that when I was in my travels, I had so many folks come up to me and tell me about those kinds of experiences. It always makes me a little sad to know how many of those kinds of things occur in relationships. This is, after all, the age of narcissism. We have a complete culture of it. It's also the age of deception. According to the TV fictional character physician House on that wonderful series, Gregory House, his famous line was, "Everybody lies." And to an extent, he has a point. Some are more egregious than others, and we've become very desensitized to it, I'm afraid. So it pretty well pains me every time I go on one of these speaking tours and I hear so many stories. I see the yearning in people's eyes and in their hearts for something more. I was struck when I was in, I can't remember exactly what city I was in. One of the cities I was giving my usual workshop, and during one of the breaks, a young woman came up to me, and you could just see in her eyes how hungry she was for a relationship that she could trust, and for a relationship in which she could feel like she wouldn't be hurt. And my heart went out to her. It seemed like she'd been to hell and back, through hell and back. And she had still not fully recovered. She seemed pretty fragile still. And she also seemed to be hanging on just about every word. She had read my book In Sheep's Clothing and found it very helpful. It opened her eyes to some things. In fact, she was kind enough to say that In Sheep's Clothing, of the books of its type, explained the most and meant the most. And that was very edifying. She had also read The Good Character Disturbance, The Judas Syndrome, and How Did We End Up Here? All of these were helpful. But she was still in a great deal of pain and sorting through her feelings, because she still doesn't know in our character impaired times, how to rightly judge, how to know when somebody is of that true sincerity of heart and purpose, how authentic they are, how genuine they are, how true they are to themselves and others, and therefore how trustworthy they can be. So my heart went out. My heart went out to her. And it also made me realize what times we're living in. Times when it's pretty difficult to believe anybody because of all the spin, especially in our political circles, all the rhetoric, all the insincerity. So that's what I want to talk about tonight. Maybe you've read the article on the blog that was posted. Maybe you haven't had a chance to do that yet. But having sincerity of heart and purpose, being of humble heart, as well as sincere heart and purpose, how important that is to one's character and to one's relationships. Perhaps you have a story you want to share, question you want to ask about that, but perhaps you just want to join the discussion on the issues or any other related issues of the time. If you do, give us a call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. I'll be happy to take your call. That's 718-717-8296. Or you can Skype as well. I do have some ways now of patching folks in, even if our system doesn't work like it's supposed to. So if you do want to call in, don't hesitate. We'll find a way to get you through. The other thing I realized when I was on my latest tour is how crazy we have become in our basically our lack of common decency and courtesy. I had an experience with an airline whose name right now will be nameless. I won't name the airline. I want to be fair as I can be, but I just have to tell you that with this one particular airline, there's sometimes I just have to travel it because of the destinations they go and the schedules that they have. And so the agent that books my tours has to use them. But my heart always sinks. It just sinks when I know I have to fly this particular airline because it will always be something. And it isn't so much that it's always something. You know, stuff happens. Error is human. It does seem like there's more error with this particular airline than with any other, but that being said, error happens. But one of the earlier commandments I wrote about is treating people with civility and generosity. And my experience with this particular airlines is anytime anything goes wrong, anytime there's a snafu, instead of being civil, generous, understanding, they always hide behind their rules and regulations and basically indicate that there's nothing that they can do to accommodate. They don't apologize. They don't accept any responsibility really for error. On on I'll just give you an example. On one of the flights, on one of the flights, they had a miscount. They couldn't account for a passenger that wasn't there. And there are rules now for security reasons that everybody has to be accounted for. Everybody that's on the flight manifesto has to be accounted for. So you have to know physically where they are, be able to account for them. Well, there was one person off in the count. And I kid you not, this took 50 minutes. 5 people counting over and over and over again, and every single time coming up with the same number. And who didn't know that was going to happen? You can only count so many times. And then having to verify on the list, and calling out names and whatnot. Finally, someone decided that it might be well worth the while, rather than repeating the same things over and over again, to just physically verify one by one every single person on the plane, which, if had been done to start with, would have saved us about 50 minutes, almost an hour. So finally that was done, and after it was done, and after the paperwork was finished, which took another 10 minutes, we were able to get on the way. But in all that, I kept wondering to myself, where is all the, I know this has to be done, but where is all the consideration for what decent people who have paid their money have to go through, and what they are going through, and the flights, the connections they might miss as a result, and everything else. And so therefore, had all that been taken into consideration, maybe, just maybe, some thought could have been given was to what's the most expeditious way to do this? How do we get this done with the minimum inconvenience to our passengers? Now, that didn't happen. That didn't happen. And so folks were notably upset, and understandably upset. And this kind of thing happens more and more often these days. I think sometimes people hide behind, sometimes they even hide behind their rules. They hide behind their positions. They forget that everything is really between one person and another. It's always personal. And people have needs. And sometimes those needs and those wants and those desires are impinged upon. Sometimes feelings are hurt. It pays to be aware of that and to show some respect for it. You know, it would have gone a long way, in my book, to simply apologize for the inconvenience. And, you know, when you do something that injures, whenever you do something that injures, you have to be ready and willing to make repair. You know, you back out of the driveway and you didn't see a car and you ding their fender. You didn't mean to do it. It was an accident, but you did damage. You did damage that's going to cost the other person in some way, and you have an obligation to repair that damage. You honor that obligation, and you honor the obligation to repair. Seems like the sense of that has gone in our character-impaired age. Common human decency has left us. for the most part. And when it comes to being of humble and sincere heart and purpose, being authentic, being genuine, perhaps nothing is as crucial. Perhaps nothing is as crucial. You know, time is very fleeting. This precious life that we enjoy, this unearned gift, this precious, precious gift of life, is fleeting. And if we're not loving, and if we're not loving sincerely, the fact is we're not really living. We have so many gods out there that we're invited to worship. Power, prestige, money, social advancement, self-aggrandization, glory. So many gods present themselves to us to worship. But you know, we're called really to revere and to worship but one. The unseen, unknowable, ineffable, incomprehensible, author of life. And we learn how to do that through truly loving one another, authentically, genuinely, unreservedly, non-judgmentally. It's a tough order for we human beings. It's a simple command, but a difficult one to be faithful to. If it were easy, we'd all be doing it. It's not easy. It's not easy to love all the time. You know when it's easy to love? It's easy to love when love meets us. But we're not called to love just when love meets us. We're called to love all the time. We're called to bring the loving response to the table, even when things are difficult, and even when the situations that we're dealing with, or even the people with whom we're dealing, are ugly in some way, are cruel in some way, are hateful in some way. We're called to do the right thing, even when the right thing is the least appealing thing we want to do. That's what we're called to do. And we all fail. And because we all fail, we're also called to forgive. And we're called to do that often. To recognize that we're all broken in some way. And it's an interesting dilemma. It's an interesting dilemma because when I was giving my workshops, my heart went out to several folks who had stories to tell about their abusive relationships and how each time in their own good nature, they kept trying to understand. They kept forgiving. They kept affording the benefit of the doubt. They kept loving. And yet they continued to be abused, degraded, even in some way resented for what their abuser saw as weakness. A really, really sad kind of scenario. And it plays out in a lot of abusive relationships. But there's a difference between drawing that firm limit and boundary and committing yourself to never be in a position to be abused again. There's a difference between that and the act, the voluntary act of forgiveness for the very sake of one's own soul. Because until you let something go, till you let it go, it can really eat at you. It can eat at you very badly, put you in a virtual hell, a prison of sorts, where you're not free. You're not free to live. You're not free to experience joy. So it's not a matter of letting somebody off the hook that did something that hurt you, that did wrong by you. It's not a matter of that. You have every single right, we all do, to do what you think you need to do to ensure your safety and to ensure your emotional well-being. But at some point, for the sake of your own soul, you have to let go. Because if you don't, it's one way the party that inflicted the pain continues to torment you. So you have to give it up for your own sake. I had 3 or 4 people come up to me with the same kind of scenario on this last tour. I even had a couple come up to me. This was very edifying. I had a couple come up to me, a lovely couple, a fairly young couple. And years earlier, the wife had bought in sheep's clothing and had determined that her husband had manipulative personality characteristics. And she began to confront him on those things. And she began to use the tools of empowerment that I describe in the book to deal with him. And he he had to take notice that she was calling him on his stuff, of his insincerity of heart and purpose, of his manipulative quality, of his uh, tendency to want to get his way through deceit, deception, and other forms of manipulation. And then he decided that he would read the book and learn about himself, which he did. And he didn't like everything he saw. So he got to work on making some changes. So, really from the get-go, there was some real decency in this person's character, even though he had some significant flaws. So both of these individuals come up to me during one of my book signing breaks, and they introduce themselves, and they tell this story, and it's so edifying. Because just the smile alone on their faces, just knowing that they somehow had found, through the resources, that they somehow had found not only the courage and the strength to face their issues, not just with themselves, but with one another, but to have enough care, enough concern, enough regard for one another to work on those issues. And for the woman, it was kindly, lovingly, but firmly confronting her spouse's behavior. And for him, it was the courage to honestly reckon, acknowledge, and do the work of self-correction and relationship repair. And it's because the two of them put genuine love, genuine, positive, mutual regard to work in their lives. It's because they were willing to give that to one another that they could be experiencing the joy that they were experiencing. And it just did my heart so good. First of all, it did my heart good to think that in any way, any of my work played a part in that. But I also felt good because I know that in most people, there is that bit of decency that needs nurturing, that needs tending to, that can grow. That capacity for humble sincerity, for humble heart, for sincerity of heart, for generosity of spirit. It's so difficult. It's so difficult to trust sometimes, especially in a world where hurts are common, where use and abuse and exploitation are common, when self-centeredness, grandiosity, lust, greed, all these things are so common. It's certainly hard, but it's not impossible. In the end, love, genuine love, not the emotion, genuine love, is the ultimate force in the universe. It's the most powerful It's not for the faint of heart. It takes a lot of courage to love in that manner. But the payoffs are immense. So I encourage you folks listening out there who are struggling, especially if you're struggling with a relationship partner who's got a lot of character development work to do so that your relationship can be the kind of relationship you've been yearning for. Even before the next book comes out, you can find the 10 Commandments of Character in abridged form in my book, Character Disturbance. And you can also find these articles on the blog. Over the past 2.5 months, every one of the commandments addressed in depth. All those essential life lessons that we have to learn in order to really be of good character, and how to go about learning them, how to go about mastering them. Once again, if you want to join the conversation tonight, the number to call is 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. I got an interesting text here just moments ago from a friend who is on a trip somewhere. I'm not sure where they're vacationing just yet. They tend to travel a lot these days. And I pride myself. I love to cook. I just love to cook. And having grown up in the background that I have, Mediterranean foods are kind of like my specialty. And I pride myself on the hummus. And when we were traveling with some friends of ours, one of the friends who just sent this text, when we were traveling to Israel, through Israel, we stopped at many places that served, traditional fare from the land, including various hummuses. And we would always be judging hummus based on the homemade variety. And we would always, I have to say it was kind of my language because I had pretty high standards for it. So whenever we would have a sample that really wasn't bad at all, but it still didn't taste like home, I would say in jest, it's not terrible. So this friend of mine just sent a text saying that they just had some hummus at the River Inn. I'm not sure where that is. And he said that it wasn't terrible. So that means it was actually pretty good. And the next time we have them over and I make hummus, I might have to up my game. That's just a gentle hint right there. So anyway, once again, if you want to join the conversation, the number to call is 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. We had a lot of interesting things occur this week on the in the political arena. Oh, and that's another thing I wanted to mention. At one of my workshops, passions ran very, very high. Passions ran very high. The deep divisions that appeared to be between people politically were just very evident. And it brought to mind just how challenging it is. How challenging it is to be a peacemaker in our day and time. To build bridges. To seek common ground. To look for those ways to resolve our conflicts peacefully and non-violently. My wife has been very active in the nonviolent movement and social justice movement called Pax Christi, starting a chapter in our state and becoming involved at the grassroots level in really helping to bring people together, to forge coalitions, to get our hands dirty, and especially to live out our faith, our professed faith, which as we see it is not in the rubrics, it's not in the rites and rituals that we practice, it's not in the Sunday exercises that we go through. It's not even in the daily exercises we go through. And it's certainly not just in the principles that we hold dear and seek to uphold and defend. It's not just that. Our faith lived is loving done. And unfortunately, we've come to realize that all too many folks professing faith do not live it. Talk, as they say, is cheap. That's one of the reasons why I wrote The Judas Syndrome. I was urged to write it. Didn't really think that I had the credentials to write it. So I balked at first when I was solicited for the work by my current co-writer and then editor, Dr. Kathy Armistead. But at the time, she was working for Abingdon Press, and she had come across a lot of my other work and decided that this is something I could and should do. And I eventually did, and I'm glad that I did. I'm glad that I did. I hope for all of you that you have the same experience and that you have the same awareness that faith lived is different from faith just professed. It's not a matter of just fulfilling certain obligations for rituals and practice. Jesus is famous for saying that a person's righteousness had to go beyond what was written in the law. The Pharisees of his time, they were very scrupulous about observing every letter of the law. That, they felt, justified them, made them worthy of God's favor, as they saw it. They would be blessed. But then Jesus says that the ones who are really blessed and the happiest are those of lowly and humble heart, those poor in spirit, the anawim, those of humble heart who are faithful to the spirit of the law and not necessarily the letter of the law, who take those opportunities when they present themselves to love. But more than that, because I said earlier, it's so easy to do it. It's so easy to do it when we're coming face to face with love directed toward us. It's easy. There's no merit in it. It requires virtually nothing. It's like a flow. The harder thing is to obey the command that he gave us to love even when it's not easy, to do good even to those that hate us, to turn the other cheek, to forgive even when we don't feel like forgiving, to show kindness and mercy, and to do rightly, to be generous, even with those who don't appear appreciative. After all, what is required of us? But to do justice and love kindness and to walk humbly in the presence of the force that created us. I'm quoting there. I'm paraphrasing, but I'm quoting. What's required? To do justice, even when injustice is done to us. To love kindness, and to walk through this life in every situation we encounter, in every person that we meet. To walk through this life in humble companionship, with the ultimate power responsible for all of it. That's what's required of us. So I hope you'll take the time to read the series that's ending now on the 10 Commandments of Character, especially this last command, to be of humble and sincere heart and purpose, to be genuine, to be authentic, and to be humble about it, recognizing that we have a great gift here in our very existence, and that we have an equal gift in each other, in all the things that we have been given. And it's how we humbly accept the burden, because it is a burden at times. It's not easy to love all the time. It's how we humbly accept that burden with a generous heart and spirit, with a humble heart. And when we're sincere and authentic with others, no pretense, no con, no deception, no manipulation, no out to get what we think will either make us happy or will bring us something we want. Just free loving for our good and the greater good. Until next week, this is Dr. George Simon, wishing you well and hoping that you've enjoyed the program and hoping you'll visit the blog and also my books, In Sheep's Clothing, Character Disturbance, The Judas Syndrome, and How Did We End Up Here? And I'll see you next week on Character Matters. Good night.